Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's victim story, I know it's annoying, but I need to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel here. I'm a new and small channel on YouTube, as you can see, and a simple click on the like button can help me a lot. So please subscribe to support me, click the like button and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Now, let's get to the case. The scorching Australian sun beat down on Bondi Beach, casting a golden sheen across the pristine sand and turquoise waters. Jake Thompson, a seasoned lifeguard with sun-bleached hair and tanned skin, surveyed the bustling scene before him from his elevated position in the central watchtower. His keen blue eyes, sharpened by years of vigilance, scanned the crowded shoreline and the undulating waves beyond. "Looks like another busy one, mate," remarked his colleague Tim as he climbed up to join Jake in the tower. Jake nodded, a wry smile playing on his lips. Summer in Sydney, wouldn't have it any other way. The beach was a tapestry of colourful umbrellas, towels and sunbathers. Children squealed with delight as they chased the retreating waves, their parents watching from the safety of the sand. Surfers bobbed in the distance, patiently waiting for the perfect set. Jake's radio crackled to life. "Tower 1, this is base. We've got a weather update. Swells expected to increase throughout the day. Over." Jake reached for the handset. "Roger that, base. We'll keep an eye on it. Over." As he replaced the radio, Jake's gaze was drawn to a group of tourists making their way down to the water's edge. Their pale skin and uncertain steps marked them as newcomers to the famous beach. "I'll do a sweep," Jake said to Tim, grabbing his rescue tube and climbing down from the tower. The hot sand burned the soles of his feet as he jogged towards the water. The salt air filled his lungs, a familiar and comforting sensation that never failed to invigorate him. As he approached the shoreline, he slowed his pace, offering friendly nods and greetings to the beachgoers. "G'day, folks," he called out to the group of tourists he'd spotted earlier. "How are we doing today?" A middle-aged man with a pronounced sunburn turned to Jake with a smile. "Wonderful, thank you. It's our first time at Bondi." Jake grinned. "Beauty of a day for it. Just remember to swim between the flags, yeah? And if you need anything, give us a shout." As he continued his patrol, Jake's mind wandered to the events that had led him to this point in his life. 33 years old, and he'd spent nearly half of those years watching over this stretch of sand and sea. It wasn't just a job. It was a calling. The memory of his first rescue still sent a shiver down his spine. He'd been barely out of training, a cocky 20-year-old who thought he knew it all. The rip current had caught an experienced swimmer off guard, dragging her out to sea with frightening speed. Jake had plunged into the water without hesitation, his heart pounding as he battled the powerful current. "You did good, kid," his mentor had told him afterward, clapping him on the back. "But never forget, the ocean doesn't care how good you are, it'll take you if you let it." Those words had stayed with Jake ever since, tempering his confidence with a healthy dose of respect for the power of the sea. A commotion near the water's edge snapped Jake back to the present. A young woman was gesticulating wildly, pointing out to sea. Jake's training kicked in immediately, his eyes following her outstretched arm to a spot beyond the breakers. There, barely visible among the swells, was a hand raised in distress. "Tim!" Jake shouted, already sprinting towards the water. "We've got a swimmer in trouble!" He didn't wait for a response, trusting that his colleague would sound the alarm and coordinate the rescue effort from the shore. Jake's world narrowed to a singular focus: reach the struggling swimmer. The cool water enveloped him as he dove through an incoming wave, his powerful strokes propelling him forward. The rescue tube trailed behind him, a lifeline for the person fighting for their life beyond the break. As he swam, Jake ran through the rescue protocols in his mind: approach from behind, establish verbal contact, assess for panic, secure the victim. These steps were ingrained in his very being, as natural to him as breathing. The swells grew larger as he pushed further out, obscuring his view of the distressed swimmer. Jake paused for a moment, treading water as he searched for any sign of movement. "Hello," he called out, his voice carrying across the waves. "Lifeguard, can you hear me?" For a heart-stopping moment there was no response. Then faintly he heard it. "Help over here." Jake oriented himself towards the sound, pushing through the water with renewed determination. As he crested a particularly large swell, he finally caught sight of the swimmer. a young man probably in his early 20s, his face a mask of terror as he struggled to keep his head above water. "I've got you, mate," Jake called out, closing the distance between them. "Try to stay calm, I'm coming to you." As he neared the panicking swimmer, Jake slowed his approach, wary of being grabbed and pulled under. The young man's eyes were wide with fear, his breathing ragged and shallow. "So what's your name?" Jake asked, keeping his voice steady and reassuring. "Mark?" the swimmer gasped. "All right, Mark. I'm Jake. I'm here to help you, okay? Can you grab onto this for me?" Jake extended the rescue tube towards Mark. Mark nodded, frantically, reaching out with trembling hands to grasp the buoyant aid. As soon as he had a firm hold, Jake began to assess the situation. No visible injuries, but Mark was clearly exhausted and on the verge of panic. "You're doing great, Mark," Jake said, maintaining eye contact. "We're going to start heading back to shore now. Just hold onto the tube and try to relax. I'll do all the work, okay?" Mark managed a weak nod, his knuckles white as he clung to the rescue tube. Jake positioned himself to begin the swim back, his mind already calculating the best path through. The swells. It was then that he felt it, a subtle shift in the water around them, a primal sense of unease that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Jake's eyes scanned the water, searching for the source of his sudden discomfort. A flash of movement caught his attention, a dark shape gliding beneath the surface just meters away. Jake's blood ran cold as recognition dawned. Shark. Years of training. Warred with the instinctive urge to flee. Jake forced himself to remain calm, knowing that any sudden movements could trigger an attack. "Mark," he said, keeping his voice low and even, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. We're going to start moving towards the shore, nice and slow. Whatever happens, do not let go of the tube, do you understand?" Mark's eyes widened as he sensed the change in Jake's demeanor. "What's wrong?" "Nothing to worry about," Jake lied smoothly, already beginning to kick slowly backwards, towing Mark with him. "Just a bit of a current we need to navigate." As they moved, Jake kept his eyes on the water around them, hyper-aware of every ripple and shadow. The dark shape had disappeared from view, but Jake knew better than to assume it was gone. They had made it perhaps 20 meters when Jake saw it, the telltale dorsal fin breaking the surface, heading straight for them. Time seemed to slow. Jake's mind raced through his options, each one more desperate than the last. In that moment, he made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. With all his strength, Jake pushed Mark and the rescue tube away from him towards the safety of the shore. "Swim," he shouted. "Don't look back, just swim." As Mark's confused and terrified face disappeared behind a swell, Jake turned to face the oncoming predator. His heart pounded in his ears, blood rushing with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The shark's dorsal fin disappeared beneath the surface, and Jake knew what was coming. He took a deep breath, ready to fight with everything he had. In the distance, he could hear the wail of the shark alarm on the beach. Help was coming. He just had to hold on. As the dark shape loomed beneath him, Jake Thompson, lifeguard of Bondi Beach, prepared to face the fight of his life. Jake's eyes narrowed as he scanned the undulating waves, his instincts on high alert. The day had progressed without incident, lulling the beachgoers into a false sense of security. But Jake knew better. The ocean was unpredictable, its moods as changeable as the wind. "How's it looking out there, Jake?" Tim's voice crackled through the radio. Jake lifted the device to his lips, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "All clear. So far, but the swell's picking up. Might need to move the flag soon." As if on cue, a particularly large wave crashed against the shore, sending a group of children squealing with delight as they scrambled away from the rushing water. Jake couldn't help but smile, remembering his own childhood spent on these very sands. The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. Something wasn't right. Jake couldn't put his finger on it, but years of experience had taught him to trust his gut. He stood up, shading his eyes with one hand as he focused on a point just beyond the break. There, a flash of movement, barely perceptible among the whitecaps. Jake's heart rate quickened as he grabbed his binoculars, bringing them to his eyes with practiced ease. "Bloody hell," he muttered, his worst fears confirmed. A lone swimmer, far beyond the safety of the flags, was clearly struggling against the current. Jake didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he grabbed his rescue board and leapt from the tower, his feet hitting the sand running. "Tim!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Swimmer in trouble, 200 meters out, past the North Flags. I'm going in." He didn't wait for a response, trusting his team to mobilize behind him. The hot sand burned his feet as he sprinted towards the water's edge, weaving between startled beachgoers. "Clear the way," Jake called out, his authoritative voice cutting through the ambient noise of the beach. People scrambled to get out of his path, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. As he reached the water's edge, Jake paused for a split second, taking in the scene before him. The waves were bigger than he'd initially realized, their crests whipped into a frenzy by the increasing wind. This wasn't going to be an easy rescue. Jake plunged into the surf, the shock of the cool water against his sun-warmed skin barely registering. He pushed through the breaking waves, his powerful arms propelling him forward as he lay flat on his rescue board. Once past the break, Jake paused, rising to his knees on the board to get a better view. The swimmer was still visible, but barely. Their movements were becoming more erratic, a clear sign of exhaustion setting in. "Hold on," Jake shouted, though he knew his voice wouldn't carry over the roar of the waves. "I'm coming." He threw himself back onto the board, paddling with renewed urgency. The swell was working against him, each wave threatening to push him back towards the shore. But Jake was in his element, reading the water's movements and using them to his advantage. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. The swimmer was a woman probably in her mid-20s. Her face was a mask of terror, her arms flailing desperately as she fought to keep her head above water. "I've got you," Jake called out as he closed the final distance between them. "Grab the board." The key. Woman's eyes locked onto Jake, a glimmer of hope breaking through the panic. She reached out with trembling hands, her fingers scrabbling for purchase on the slick surface of the rescue board. Jake maneuvered the board alongside her, his steady voice a lifeline in the chaos. "That's it. You're doing great. Just hold on. Tight, okay? I'm going to get you back to shore." The woman nodded, too exhausted to speak. Jake could feel her whole body shaking as she clung to the board. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep her focused and conscious. Sarah." She managed to gasp between ragged breaths. "All right, Sarah, I'm Jake. You're safe now, but I need you to stay with me, okay? Can you do that?" Sarah nodded again, her knuckles white as she gripped the board. Jake began the arduous process of paddling them both back to shore. The return journey was always more challenging, fighting against the currents that had so easily swept Sarah out to sea. But Jake was prepared, his muscles burning with the effort as he propelled them forward. As they neared the break, Jake knew they were facing the most dangerous part of the rescue. The powerful waves could easily separate them, undoing all their progress in an instant. "Sarah, listen carefully," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "We're about to hit some big waves. No matter what happens, do not let go of this board. Do you understand?" Sarah's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded resolutely. The first wave hit them like a freight train, the water engulfing them both in a churning maelstrom of white foam. Jake held on tight, feeling Sarah's grip on the board tighten as they were tossed about. As they surfaced, Jake quickly checked on Sarah. She was still there, sputtering and coughing, but holding on with grim determination. "You're doing great," Jake encouraged her. "Just a few more to go." They rode out the next series of waves, each one threatening to tear them apart but ultimately failing to break their resolve. As they finally passed through the break, Jake felt a surge of relief. They had made it through the worst. The water was shallower now, allowing Jake to stand. He helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her as they stumbled towards the shore. A crowd had gathered at the water's edge, Tim and another lifeguard wading out to meet them. As soon as they reached the sand, Sarah's legs gave out. Jake caught her before she could fall, scooping her up in his arms and carrying her the rest of the way up the beach. The waiting paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher, and Jake gently laid Sarah down. Her eyes found his, filled with gratitude and residual fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." Jake squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You're safe now. These guys will take good care of you." As the paramedics began their assessment, Jake stepped back, the adrenaline of the rescue beginning to ebb. Tim approached, clapping him on the shoulder. "Nice work out there, mate," Tim said. "That was a tough one." Jake nodded, his eyes still on Sarah as she was loaded into the ambulance. Yeah, it was touch and go for a bit. The current's stronger than usual today. Tim's expression grew serious. Jake, there's something you should know. While you were out there, we spotted something else in the water. Jake felt a chill run down his spine, one that had nothing to do with his wet skin. What do you mean? Tim hesitated, then said, a fin. Big one. Probably a tiger shark from the size of it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications of Tim's words sank in. Jake had been so focused on the rescue, he hadn't even considered the possibility of other dangers lurking beneath the waves. Where was it? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tim pointed to a spot not far from where Jake had found Sarah, right in that area. It disappeared pretty quickly, but, mate, it was close. Too close. Jake felt a cold sweat break out across his skin, despite the heat of the day. The realization of how narrowly they had avoided disaster was overwhelming. We need to clear the beach, Jake said, snapping back into professional mode. Get everyone out of the water now. As Tim rushed off to sound the alarm, Jake took a moment to collect himself. The day had taken an unexpected turn, reminding him once again of the ocean's capacity for both beauty and danger. He looked out at the seemingly peaceful waves, knowing that beneath the surface, unseen threats were always present. It was a sobering reminder of the responsibility he carried as a lifeguard and the thin line they walked between safety and disaster. With a deep breath, Jake straightened his shoulders and turned back to the beach. There was work to be done, and he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now he had done his job. He had saved a life. As the shark alarm began to wail across the beach, Jake moved into action, ready to face whatever the ocean might throw at him next. Jake's muscles burned as he powered through the churning surf, his eyes fixed on the struggling figure in the distance. The roar of the waves filled his ears, punctuated by the faint, desperate cries of the swimmer. With each powerful stroke, Jake closed the gap, his mind racing through rescue protocols and worst-case scenarios. "Hold on," he shouted, though he knew his voice was lost in the cacophony of wind and water. "I'm coming." As he neared the distressed swimmer, Jake slowed his approach, wary of the panic that often turned victims into unintentional threats to their rescuers. The swimmer, a young man with dark hair plastered to his forehead, thrashed wildly in the water, his eyes wide with terror. "Hey!" Jake called out, treading water a few meters away. "I'm here to help. What's your name?" The swimmer coughed and sputtered, struggling to keep his head above the swells. "Mike," he managed to gasp. "All right, Mike," Jake said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I'm Jake, a lifeguard. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay calm. Can you do that for me?" Mike nodded frantically, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Jake could see the exhaustion etched on his face, the telltale signs of a swimmer who had pushed himself to the limit, fighting against the merciless current. Jake slowly closed the distance between them, extending his rescue tube. Grab onto this, Mike. It'll help keep you afloat." As Mike's trembling hands grasped the bright orange float, Jake quickly assessed the situation. They were farther out than he'd initially realized, the rip current having dragged Mike well beyond the breakers. The return journey would be challenging, especially with the swell picking up. "Okay, Mike," Jake said, maintaining eye contact. "We're going to start heading back to shore. Just hold onto the tube and try to relax. I'll do the work, all right?" Mike nodded again, his knuckles white as he clung to the rescue tube. Jake began to swim, powerful kicks propelling them through the water. He kept a watchful eye on Mike, noting the way the young man's gaze darted nervously across the waves. "So, Mike," Jake said, trying to distract him from their precarious situation, "what brought you out this far?" Mike's face flushed with embarrassment, even through his exhaustion. I was trying to impress a girl," he admitted sheepishly. "Thought I'd swim out to that far buoy. Didn't realize how strong the current was." Jake nodded understandingly, though internally he fought the urge to roll his eyes. It was always the same story: overconfidence, underestimation of the ocean's power, and a dash of bravado. A potentially lethal combination. "Well, let's get you back to that girl in one piece, eh?" Jake said with a reassuring smile. "Though next time maybe try impressing her with your sandcastle building skills instead." A weak chuckle escaped Mike's lips, some of the tension leaving his body. Jake felt a small sense of relief, a calm. Victim was always easier to rescue than a panicked one. As they made steady progress towards the shore, Jake's instincts suddenly flared. Something had changed in the water around them. A subtle shift that sent a chill down his spine, despite the warm Australian sun beating down on them. Years of experience had taught Jake to trust his gut. His eyes scanned the water, searching for any sign of what had triggered his unease. The surface remained deceptively calm, broken only by the rhythmic swells. "Everything okay?" Mike asked, picking up on Jake's sudden alertness. Jake forced a smile, not wanting to alarm his already frightened charge. "Just checking our position," he lied smoothly. "We're making good progress." But as the words left his mouth, Jake saw it, a dark shadow gliding beneath the surface, just meters away. His heart rate spiked, years of training warring with primal fear. Shark. Jake's mind raced, calculating their options. They were still too far from shore to make a sprint for it, and any sudden movements might trigger the predator's hunting instincts. Their best bet was to remain calm and continue their steady progress. "Mike," Jake said, keeping his voice low and even, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. We're going to keep moving towards the shore, nice and slow. Whatever happens, do not let go of the tube, understand?" Mike's eyes widened, sensing the change in Jake's demeanor. "What's going on?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Jake hesitated, weighing the need for honesty against the risk of causing panic. "We've got some company," he said finally. "But it's going to be all right. Just stay calm and follow my lead." As they continued to move, Jake kept his eyes on the water around them, hyper-aware of every ripple and shadow. The dark shape had disappeared from view, but Jake knew better than to assume it was gone. They had made it another 20 meters when Jake saw it again, the telltale dorsal fin breaking the surface, heading straight for them. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity, as Jake made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. With all his strength, he pushed Mike and the rescue tube away from him, towards the safety of the shore. "Swim!" he shouted. "Don't look back, just swim!" Mike's confused and terrified face disappeared behind a swell as Jake turned to face the oncoming predator. His heart pounded in his ears, blood rushing with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The shark's fin disappeared beneath the surface, and Jake knew what was coming. He took a deep breath, ready to fight with everything he had. In the distance, he could hear the wail of the shark alarm on the beach. Help was coming. He just had to hold on. As the dark shape loomed beneath him, Jake braced himself for impact. The water around him exploded as the shark breached, its massive jaws open wide. Jake barely had time to register the rows of razor-sharp teeth before instinct took over. He lashed out with his fist, striking the shark's sensitive snout with all his might. The impact sent a jolt of pain up his arm, but he felt a surge of triumph as the predator recoiled, momentarily stunned. Jake used the brief reprieve to start swimming, powerful strokes carrying him towards the shore. He could hear Mike's panicked shouts in the distance, mixed with the growing clamor from the beach as onlookers realized the danger unfolding. But Jake couldn't afford to look back. Every fiber of his being was focused on survival, on making it through the next stroke. The next breath. The shore seemed impossibly far away, a thin line of golden sand that might as well have been on another planet. A sudden movement in the water beside him sent a fresh wave of terror through Jake's body. The shark was back, circling closer with each pass. Jake could see its dark eye watching him, cold and unfeeling, as it prepared for another attack. In that moment, as he faced his own mortality in the vastness of the ocean, Jake thought of all the people he'd saved over the years, all the lives he'd touched, the disasters he'd averted. If this was to be his last act as a lifeguard, he was determined to make it count. With renewed determination, Jake pressed on. His muscles screamed in protest, lactic acid burning through his veins, but he refused to give in. He could hear the roar of a jet ski approaching. Help was close. The shark made its move, surging towards Jake with terrifying speed. This time there was no chance to dodge or fight back. Jake felt a searing pain as the predator's teeth sank into his leg, the force of the attack pulling him under the surface. Water filled his nose and mouth as Jake struggled against the shark's grip. His lungs burned, desperate for air, as he was dragged deeper into the ocean's cold embrace. In the murky depths, Jake's life flashed before his eyes, his childhood on these very shores, his first rescue, the countless lives he'd saved. With the last reserves of his strength, Jake reached down and gouged at the shark's eye. The gambit worked. He felt the pressure on his leg release as the shark thrashed away. Jake kicked desperately for the surface, his injured leg trailing uselessly behind him. As his head broke the water, he gasped for air, coughing and sputtering, through blurred vision. He saw the jet ski approaching, Tim's familiar figure at the controls. Jake raised a weak arm, signaling his position before the encroaching darkness at the edges of his vision threatened to overwhelm him. The last thing Jake remembered was the sensation of strong arms pulling him from the water, and Tim's voice, tight with fear and relief. "I've got you, mate. You're going to be all right." As consciousness slipped away, Jake's final thought was of the ocean, beautiful, deadly, and forever changed in his eyes. The rescuer had become the rescued, and nothing would ever be the same again. The world exploded into chaos as the massive tiger shark erupted from the water, its jaws clamping down on Jake's leg with bone-crushing force. Time seemed to slow, each millisecond etched into Jake's mind with crystal clarity. The searing pain, the metallic taste of fear, the roar of blood in his ears, all of it coalesced into a single, horrifying moment of realization. He was being attacked by one of the ocean's apex predators. "No!" Jake screamed, his voice raw with pain and defiance. In that split second, his training kicked in, overriding the paralyzing fear that threatened to consume him. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, he pushed the panicking swimmer away. "Swim, get to shore!" he shouted, his eyes locked on the terrified face of the man he'd come to save. The shark thrashed violently, its powerful body twisting as it attempted to drag Jake beneath the waves. Jake could feel the teeth tearing through muscle and tissue, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through his body. But he refused to give in to the pain, refused to let it cloud his judgment. Survival was all that mattered now. Drawing on years of experience and training, Jake struck out at the shark's sensitive snout and eyes. His fists pounded against the rough skin, each impact jarring his arms, but fueled by desperate determination. "Let go, you bastard," he growled through gritted teeth. The shark released its grip momentarily, surprised by the unexpected resistance from its prey. Jake seized the opportunity, kicking hard with his uninjured leg to put some distance between himself and the predator. Blood clouded the water around him, and Jake knew with grim certainty that it would only serve to drive the shark into a greater frenzy. As he struggled to stay afloat, Jake's mind raced through his options. The shore seemed impossibly far away, a thin line of golden sand that might as well have been on another continent. He could hear shouts from the beach, the distant wail of sirens. But in that moment, Jake was utterly alone in his battle for survival. The shark circled back, its dorsal fin cutting through the water with terrifying speed. Jake's heart pounded. In his chest, each beat a desperate affirmation of life in the face of impending doom. He knew he couldn't outswim the predator, not with his injured leg trailing uselessly behind him. His only hope was to keep fighting, to make himself too much trouble to be worth the effort. As the shark closed in for another attack, Jake plunged his hand into the water, searching frantically for anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers closed around his rescue tube, still miraculously attached to his waist. With a surge of desperate inspiration, Jake yanked the tube free and held it in front of him like a shield. The shark's jaws clamped down on the buoyant foam, its teeth sinking deep into the material. Jake used the moment of confusion to his advantage, pushing the tube further into the shark's mouth while simultaneously kicking away with all his might. "Come on," he shouted, half in defiance, half in prayer. "Someone help!" As if in answer to his plea, Jake heard the roar of a jet ski approaching. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw Tim, his fellow lifeguard, racing towards him. Relief flooded through Jake's body, tempered by the knowledge that he still had to survive long enough for help to reach him. The shark, momentarily stymied by the rescue tube lodged in its mouth, circled back for another pass. Jake could see the cold black eye watching him, devoid of any emotion save the primal drive to feed. In that moment, Jake understood with perfect clarity his place in the natural order. No longer the confident lifeguard, master of his domain, but prey fighting desperately for survival. "Jake," Tim's voice carried over the water. "Hang on, mate, I'm coming." The sound of his friend's voice gave Jake a fresh surge of determination. He wasn't going to die here, not today, not when he had a job to do, lives to save, a purpose to fulfill. As the shark made another lunge, Jake made a split-second decision. Instead of trying to evade, he surged forward, meeting the attack head-on. His hands found purchase on the shark's rough skin, grappling with the massive predator in a perverse underwater wrestling match. "You want a fight?" Jake snarled, his face contorted with pain and fierce resolve. "Then let's fight." Jake's fingers dug into the shark's gills, eliciting a violent reaction from the creature. It thrashed wildly, its powerful tail churning the water into a froth of blood and foam. Jake held on with every ounce of strength he possessed, knowing that to let go now would mean certain death. The world narrowed to a blur of teeth and skin and blood. Jake could feel his strength ebbing, the loss of blood and the strain of the fight taking their toll. But he refused to give up, refused to let the ocean claim him, not when he'd spent his life mastering its moods, respecting its power, saving those who underestimated its dangers. Just as Jake felt his grip beginning to slip, a new sound cut through the chaos, the unmistakable report of a shark shield. Tim had arrived, the electromagnetic pulses from the device sending shockwaves of discomfort through the shark's sensitive receptors. The predator recoiled, releasing its grip on Jake and retreating into the depths with powerful sweeps of its tail. Jake felt strong arms grabbing him, hauling him onto the back of the jet ski. "I've got you, mate." Tim's voice was tight with fear and relief. "Just hold on. We're getting you out of here." As they sped towards the shore, Jake's adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by waves of searing pain. He looked down at his mangled leg, the extent of his injuries becoming apparent through the haze of shock. "The swimmer," Jake gasped, his voice weak. "Did he make it?" Tim nodded, his eyes focused on navigating the choppy waters. "He's safe. You saved his life, Jake. Now let's save yours." The beach came into focus. A crowd of onlookers and emergency personnel gathered at the water's edge. Jake could see the ambulance waiting, its lights flashing a silent promise of help and hope. As they neared the shallows, Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Gratitude for the skills that had kept him alive, for the teammates who had come to his rescue, for the simple gift of another breath, another heartbeat. The jet ski ground to a halt in the surf, and instantly Jake was surrounded by a flurry of activity. Paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher, their voices a cacophony of medical jargon that washed over him in waves. "BP's dropping. We need to stop this bleeding now. Possible arterial damage. Prep for immediate surgery. Stay with us, mate. You're going to be okay." As Jake was rushed towards the waiting ambulance, he caught sight of the swimmer he'd rescued. The young man stood wrapped in a shock blanket, his face pale and tear-streaked as he watched Jake being whisked away. There, eyes met for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. In that glance was gratitude, guilt, and the weight of a life irrevocably changed. Jake managed a weak smile, trying to convey reassurance, even as his own world teetered on the brink. "It's okay," he mouthed, unsure if the words actually passed his lips. "You're safe now." The doors of the ambulance slammed shut, cutting off Jake's view of the beach, the ocean, the world he'd dedicated his life to protecting. As the vehicle lurched into motion, sirens wailing, Jake felt the full weight of what had transpired crash down upon him. He had faced death and emerged victorious, but at what cost? The ocean, once his home and sanctuary, had revealed its darkest aspect. The job he loved, the life he'd built, all of it hung in the balance, dependent on the skill of surgeons and the capricious nature of healing. As consciousness began to slip away, Jake's last thoughts were of the sea, its beauty, its power, its unforgiving nature. He had always known the risks, had seen firsthand the tragedies that could unfold in its depths. But now, for the first time, he understood truly and personally the price of underestimating its dangers. The steady beep of heart monitors faded into the background as Jake drifted into unconsciousness, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken. The battle was over, but the war for recovery, both physical and mental, was just beginning. and Jake Thompson, lifeguard and survivor, was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Jake's world had narrowed to a pinpoint of agony and desperation. The tiger shark's massive form circled him, its dark eye fixed on its prey with cold primal hunger. Blood clouded the water around them, turning the once crystal blue into a murky crimson. Jake's leg throbbed where the shark's teeth had torn, through flesh and muscle, but the pain was secondary to the overwhelming need to survive. "Come on, you bastard," Jake muttered through gritted teeth, his eyes never leaving the predator. He treaded water with one arm, the other clutching his mangled leg in a futile attempt to stem the bleeding. "Let's finish this." The shark made another pass, closer this time. Jake could see the rows of serrated teeth, designed by nature for tearing and shredding. He knew that if those jaws closed on him again, it would likely be the end. But Jake Thompson wasn't ready to die. Not here, not now, not like this. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, Jake lunged forward as the shark approached. His hand shot out, fingers curled into a fist aiming for the creature's sensitive snout. The impact sent shockwaves of pain up Jake's arm, but he felt a surge of fierce satisfaction as the shark recoiled, momentarily confused by its prey's unexpected aggression. "That's right," Jake snarled, his voice raw with pain and determination. "I'm not going down without a fight." In the distance, Jake could hear the roar of jet skis approaching. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? The shark was already circling back, undeterred by Jake's defensive maneuver. Jake's mind raced, years of training and experience battling against the primal fear that threatened to overwhelm him. He knew that panic was as deadly as the shark itself. Forcing himself to focus, Jake assessed his options. His rescue tube was gone, torn away in the initial attack. His leg was useless, trailing behind him like bait in the water. The shore seemed impossibly far away, a thin line of golden sand that might as well have been on another planet. Jake knew he couldn't outswim the shark, not in his condition. His only hope was to keep fighting, to make himself too much trouble to be worth the effort. As the shark closed in for another attack, Jake plunged his hand into the water, searching frantically for anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers closed around a piece of driftwood, a broken plank about the length of his forearm. It wasn't much, but it was something. The shark's dorsal fin cut through the water, heading straight for Jake. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity as Jake braced himself for the impact. "Come on," he shouted, half in defiance, half in desperation. "Come and get me." The shark lunged, its massive jaws opening wide. Jake thrust the piece of driftwood forward, jamming it vertically into the creature's mouth. The shark's teeth sank into the wood, momentarily confused by the unexpected obstacle. Jake used the moment of confusion to his advantage, kicking hard with his good leg to put some distance between himself and the predator. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through his injured limb, but Jake pushed through the pain, his survival instinct overriding everything else. "Jake!" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Tim, his fellow lifeguard, was approaching on a jet ski, his face a mask of determination and fear. "Hang on, mate, I'm almost there." The sound of his friend's voice gave Jake a renewed surge of energy. He wasn't alone in this fight. He just had to hold on a little longer. The shark, having freed itself from the driftwood, was circling back. Jake could see the cold determination in its eye, the relentless drive to feed that had made these creatures the ocean's apex predators for millions of years. "Tim!" Jake shouted, his voice hoarse. "Shark shield! Use the shark shield!" Tim nodded, reaching for the device mounted on the jet ski. The shark shield emitted a powerful electromagnetic field designed to deter sharks, creating an uncomfortable sensation in their electroreceptive organs. As Tim activated the shield, the effect on the shark was immediate and dramatic. The creature thrashed in the water, clearly distressed by the invisible force assaulting its senses. It veered away from Jake, seeking to escape the uncomfortable sensation. Tim maneuvered the jet ski alongside Jake, reaching out to grab his arm. "I've got you, mate," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Let's get you out of here." With a monumental effort, Jake hauled himself onto the back of the jet ski, collapsing behind Tim. The adrenaline that had kept him going began to ebb, replaced by waves of searing pain and encroaching shock. As they sped towards the shore, Jake's mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. He had faced death and emerged victorious. But at what cost? The ocean, once his home and sanctuary, had revealed its darkest aspect. The job he loved, the life he'd built, all of it hung in the balance. The swimmer, Jake gasped, remembering the reason he'd entered the water in the first place. Did he make it? Tim nodded, his eyes focused on navigating the choppy waters. He's safe. You saved his life, Jake. Now let's save yours. The beach came into focus. A crowd of onlookers and emergency personnel gathered at the water's edge. Jake could see the ambulance waiting, its lights flashing a silent promise of help and hope. As they neared the shallows, Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Gratitude for the skills that had kept him alive, for the teammates who had come to his rescue, for the simple gift of another breath, another heartbeat. The jet ski ground to a halt in the surf, and instantly Jake was surrounded by a flurry of activity. Paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher, their voices a cacophony of medical jargon that washed over him in waves. BP's dropping. We need to stop. This bleeding now. Possible arterial damage. Prep for immediate surgery. Stay with us, mate. You're going to be okay. As Jake was rushed towards the waiting ambulance, he caught sight of the swimmer he'd rescued. The young man stood wrapped in a shock blanket, his face pale and tear-streaked as he watched Jake being whisked away. Their eyes met for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. In that glance was gratitude, guilt, and the weight of a life irrevocably changed. Jake managed a weak smile, trying to convey reassurance even as his own world teetered on the brink. "It's okay," he mouthed, unsure if the words actually passed his lips. "You're safe now." The doors of the ambulance slammed shut, cutting off Jake's view of the beach, the ocean, the world he'd dedicated his life to protecting. As the vehicle lurched into motion, sirens wailing, Jake felt the full weight of what had transpired crash down upon him. He had survived, but the battle was far from over. The road to recovery would be long and arduous, filled with physical pain and psychological hurdles. The ocean, once a source of joy and purpose, now loomed in his mind as a realm of hidden dangers and primal fears. As the ambulance raced through the streets, Jake's thoughts turned to the future. Would he ever be able to return to the job he loved? Could he face the waves again without reliving the terror of this day? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswerable in the moment, but demanding attention nonetheless. Through the haze of pain and encroaching unconsciousness, Jake made a silent vow to himself. He would survive this. He would recover, rehabilitate, and return to the beach. The ocean had tried to claim him, but Jake Thompson wasn't finished yet. He had more lives to save, more challenges to face, more lessons to learn from the vast and unpredictable sea. As darkness finally claimed him, Jake's last conscious thought was of the endless blue horizon, stretching out beyond the reach of human comprehension. In that vastness lay both danger and beauty, terror and wonder, and Jake, battered but unbroken, was determined to embrace it all once again. The wail of sirens pierced the air as the ambulance raced through the streets of Sydney, its precious cargo fighting for survival in the back. Jake Thompson, veteran lifeguard and shark attack survivor, lay on the stretcher, his world reduced to a haze of pain and the frantic voices of the paramedics working to save his life. "BP's dropping. We need to push more fluids," one paramedic shouted, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she adjusted the IV drip. Jake's vision swam, the faces above him blurring into indistinct shapes. He tried to focus, to stay present, but the shock and blood loss were taking their toll. The taste of salt water and copper lingered in his mouth, a grim reminder of the ordeal he'd just endured. "Jake, can you hear me?" Another paramedic leaned in close, his voice cutting through the fog. "I need you to stay with us, mate. We're almost at the hospital." Jake managed a weak nod, his throat too dry to form words. He wanted to tell them about the shark, about the swimmer he'd saved, about the moment he thought he was going to die, but all he could do was lie there, every bump and turn of the ambulance sending fresh waves of agony through his mangled legs. They sped through the city. Jake's mind drifted back to the attack. He could still see the shark's cold black eye, feel the terrible pressure of its jaws clamping down on his flesh. The memory sent a shudder through his body, setting off a chorus of beeps from the medical equipment surrounding him. He's going into shock. the first paramedic called out. "We need to stabilize him now." Jake felt a warmth spreading through his veins as new medication was introduced into his system. The pain began to recede, replaced by a floating sensation that threatened to carry him away into unconsciousness. "Stay with us, Jake," the second paramedic urged, his face swimming into focus. "Tell me about your job. How long have you been?" "A lifeguard." Jake licked his dry lips, forcing himself to concentrate on the question. 15 years, he managed to rasp. 15 years, that's impressive, the paramedic said, his tone encouraging. "You must have seen a lot in that time." Jake nodded weakly. Never anything like this," he whispered. The paramedic smiled grimly. "I bet not. But you're tough, Jake. You survived out there, and you're going to survive this too." As the ambulance careened around a corner, Jake's thoughts turned to his family. His wife, Sarah, would be waiting at the hospital, probably sick with worry. And his daughter, Emma, just 7 years old. What would this mean for her? The thought of never being able to swim with her again, to teach her the ways of the ocean he loved so much, sent a pang of fear through his heart, stronger than any physical pain. "My family," Jake gasped, trying to sit up. "They need to know." Easy, the paramedic soothed, gently pushing Jake back down. "We've already contacted them. They'll be waiting for you at the hospital. Right now, you need to focus on staying calm and conserving your strength." Jake relaxed slightly, comforted by the knowledge that Sarah and Emma would be there. He closed his eyes, trying to picture their faces, to draw strength from the love he knew would be waiting for him. The ambulance came to a sudden stop, and Jake's eyes flew open. They had arrived at the hospital. The back doors burst open, revealing a team of doctors and nurses ready to take over his care. Shark attack victim, severe lacerations to the right leg, possible arterial damage, one of the paramedics reported as they wheeled Jake out. "He's lost a significant amount of blood and is showing signs of shock." Jake was rushed through the emergency room doors, the bright fluorescent lights overhead blinding after the dim interior of the ambulance. He caught snippets of conversation as he was wheeled down the hallway. "Ortho is prepped and ready. Get Ortho down here, Stat. We need to start him on broad-spectrum antibiotics immediately." As they reached the operating room, Jake saw a familiar face among the sea of medical personnel. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an old friend who had patched him up after more than a few surfing accidents over the years. "Jake Thompson," Elena said, her voice a mixture of professional calm and personal concern. "When they told me a lifeguard had been attacked by a shark, I prayed it wasn't you." "Sorry to disappoint," Jake managed a weak smile. Elena's eyes softened for a moment before her professional demeanor took over. "We're going to take good care of you, Jake, but I need you to fight, okay? This isn't going to be easy." Jake nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I will, I promise." As the anesthesiologist approached with the mask, Jake felt a sudden surge of panic. "Wait," he called out, his voice stronger than it had been since the attack. "My wife, my daughter." "They're here," Elena assured him. "You'll see them as soon as you're out of surgery. Now I need you to count backward from 10 for me." Jake took a deep breath, the mask descending over his face. 10, 9, 8. As consciousness slipped away, Jake's last thoughts were of the ocean. Its vastness, its beauty, its unforgiving nature. He had always known the risks, had seen firsthand the tragedies that could unfold in its depths. But now, for the first time, he understood truly and personally the price of underestimating its dangers. The steady beep of heart monitors faded into the background as Jake drifted into unconsciousness, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. The battle was over, but the war for recovery, both physical and mental, was just beginning. Hours later, Jake slowly emerged from the fog of anesthesia. The first sensation he became aware of was pressure on his hand. As his eyes fluttered open, he saw Sarah sitting beside his bed, her fingers intertwined with his, her face etched with worry and relief. "Hey, hero," she said softly, a tremulous smile on her lips. Jake tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Sarah quickly offered him a sip of water through a straw. "Easy," she cautioned. "Small sips." After moistening his throat, Jake managed to croak out, "Emma?" "She's with my parents," Sarah assured him. "She knows you're hurt, but we didn't give her the details. We thought it best to wait until we knew more." Jake nodded, grateful for Sarah's foresight. His eyes drifted down to his leg, now heavily bandaged and elevated. "How bad?" he asked, dreading the answer. Sarah squeezed his hand. "It was touch and go for a while," she admitted. "You lost a lot of blood and there was significant muscle and tissue damage, but Dr. Rodriguez is optimistic. She says with time and physical therapy, you should regain most of your function." "Most," Jake repeated, the word hanging heavy in the air between them. Sarah leaned in, her eyes fierce with love and determination. "Hey, look at me. You're alive, Jake. After what you went through, that's nothing short of a miracle. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Jake felt tears welling up in his eyes, the full weight of what had happened finally hitting him. "I thought I was going to die out there," he whispered. "All I could think about was you and Emma, and how I might never see you again." Sarah's own eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But you didn't die. You fought, Jake. You fought and you survived, and now you're going to keep fighting because that's who you are." Jake nodded, drawing strength from his wife's unwavering support. As the medication began to pull him back towards sleep, he made a silent vow. He would recover. He would rebuild his strength. And someday, somehow, he would return to the ocean that had both nearly claimed his life and given it purpose for so many years. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with physical pain and psychological hurdles. But as Jake drifted off to sleep, his wife's hand still clasped in his, he knew he wouldn't be facing those challenges alone. And that knowledge, more than any medicine, gave him hope for the future. Jake Thompson's eyes fluttered open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room momentarily blinding him. As his vision cleared, he became acutely aware of the dull throbbing in his leg, a constant reminder of his encounter with the tiger shark. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided a rhythmic backdrop to his thoughts as he tried to piece together the events that had led him here. "Welcome back to the land of the living," a familiar voice said softly. Jake turned his head to see Dr. Elena Rodriguez standing at the foot of his bed, a tablet in her hands and a cautious smile on her face. "How long was I out?" Jake asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "Just over 24 hours, Elena replied, moving to check his vitals. "We had to keep you sedated to allow your body to start healing. How are you feeling?" Jake took a moment to assess himself. The pain in his leg was there, but muted, likely thanks to whatever cocktail of drugs they had him on. "Like I went 10 rounds with a great white," he said with a weak attempt at humor. Elena's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, you're not far off. That tiger shark did quite a number on you, Jake. We've managed to repair most of the damage, but you're looking at a long road to recovery." Jake nodded, bracing himself for the details. "Give it to me straight, Doc. How bad is it?" Elena pulled up a chair and sat down, her expression turning serious. "The shark's teeth caused significant damage to the muscles and tendons in your right leg. We were able to save the leg, but there was extensive tissue loss. You're going to need multiple surgeries and intensive physical therapy." Jake closed his eyes, letting the information sink in. He'd known it was bad, but hearing it, laid out so clinically, made it all too real. Will I be able to go back to work?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Elena hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's too early to say for certain, Jake. With hard work and dedication, you may be able to regain much of your function. But returning to active duty, as a lifeguard, it's going to be an uphill battle." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Being a lifeguard wasn't just his job, it was his identity, his passion. The thought of never patrolling the beaches again, never feeling the rush of a successful rescue, left him feeling hollow. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena reached out and squeezed his hand. "Hey, if anyone can beat the odds, it's you. I've known you for years, Jake. You're one of the toughest, most determined people I've ever met. Don't count yourself out just yet." Jake managed a small nod, grateful for her encouragement, even as doubt gnawed at him. "Thanks, Elena, I appreciate it." Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. Sarah, Jake's wife, peeked her head in, her face lighting up when she saw Jake was awake. "Jake!" "Oh, thank God," she said, rushing to his bedside and carefully embracing him. Jake held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, finding comfort in her presence. As they parted, he noticed the dark circles under her eyes. the worry lines etched into her forehead. "I'll give you two some time," Elena said, standing up. "Jake, we'll talk more later about your treatment plan. Try to rest for now." As Elena left, Sarah took her place in the chair by Jake's bed, her hand finding his. "How are you feeling, really?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. Jake sighed, knowing he couldn't hide anything from her. "Scared," he admitted. "Angry, confused. I keep replaying it in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You saved that swimmer's life, Jake. You're a hero. Some hero," Jake said bitterly. "I couldn't even save myself." "But you did," Sarah insisted. "You fought that shark and you survived. Do you have any idea how incredible that is?" Jake looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Elena says, she says I might not be able to go back to being a lifeguard." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "Then we'll figure something else out," she said finally. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Jake felt a lump forming in his throat, overwhelmed by her unwavering support. "What about Emma?" he asked, thinking of their 7-year-old daughter. "How much does she know?" "She knows you were hurt at work and that you're in the hospital," Sarah explained. "We didn't give her the details about the shark attack. We thought it might be too scary for her." Jake nodded, relieved. The last thing he wanted was for his little girl to be afraid of the ocean he'd always taught her to love and respect. "Can I see her?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. "Are you sure you're up for it? You've been through a lot and—" "Please," Jake interrupted. "I need to see her to know that it was all worth it." Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. She nodded and stood up. "I'll go get her. She's been asking about you non-stop." As Sarah left to fetch Emma, Jake steeled himself. He didn't want to frighten his daughter, but he also knew he couldn't hide the reality of his condition from her forever. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and a small figure came barreling in. "Daddy!" Emma cried, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Hey, sweetheart," Jake said, forcing a smile onto his face. "Come here, give your old man a hug." Emma approached the bed cautiously, her eyes wide as she took in the various tubes and machines surrounding her father. Sarah gently lifted her onto the edge of the bed, and Emma carefully snuggled up against Jake's side. "Does it hurt?" she asked in a small voice, pointing to his bandaged leg. Jake smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "A little bit," he said honestly, "but the doctors are giving me medicine to make it feel better." Emma was quiet for a moment, her little brow furrowed in thought. "Mommy said you got hurt saving someone, is that true?" Jake exchanged a glance with Sarah before answering. "Yes, that's true. There was a man who needed help in the water and I went to save him." "Like a superhero?" Emma asked, her eyes lighting up. Jake chuckled softly. "I don't know about that. I was just doing my job." "But you got hurt," Emma persisted. "Superheroes always get hurt when they're saving people." Jake felt a lump forming in his throat. Leave it to a child to find the silver lining in all of this. "You're right, sweetie. Sometimes they do." Emma snuggled closer, careful not to jostle his injured leg. "When you get better, can we go to the beach again? You promised to teach me how to surf." The innocent question hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He looked to Sarah for help, unsure how to respond. Sarah stepped in smoothly. "We'll have to see what the doctors say, Emma. Daddy needs to focus on getting better first. But I'm sure when he's ready, he'll be happy to teach you." Jake nodded, grateful for Sarah's intervention. "That's right, sweetheart. As soon as I'm able, we'll hit the waves together. I promise." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer and began chattering about her day at school, filling the hospital room with a sense of normalcy that Jake desperately needed. As he listened to his daughter's animated stories, Jake felt a mix of emotions washing over him. Gratitude for his family's love and support, fear for the uncertain future ahead, determination to overcome the challenges he faced, and beneath it all, a fierce resolve to keep his promise to Emma, to return to the ocean that had shaped his life in so many ways. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, Jake knew. There would be setbacks and moments of doubt. But looking at his wife and daughter, he found the strength to face whatever lay ahead. He had survived the shark attack against all odds. Now he would prove to himself and to the world that Jake Thompson, lifeguard and survivor, was far from finished. As the afternoon wore on and Emma's stories began to wind down, Jake felt exhaustion creeping in. The emotional toll of the day, combined with his body's need for healing, was catching up to him. Sarah, ever attuned to his needs, noticed his eyelids growing heavy. "All right, Emma," she said gently. "I think it's time we let Daddy get some rest. We can come back to visit tomorrow." Emma pouted but didn't argue. She carefully gave Jake another hug, mindful of his injuries. "Get better soon, Daddy," she whispered. "I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart," Jake replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than all the fish in the sea." As Sarah ushered Emma out of the room, promising to return later, Jake settled back against his pillows. The visit had lifted his spirits, but it had also brought home the reality of the challenges that lay ahead. He closed his eyes, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor lulling him towards sleep. As he drifted off, Jake's mind returned to the ocean. In his dreams, he saw not the terrifying maw of the shark, but the endless blue horizon, full of possibility and adventure. It was a reminder of why he had become a lifeguard in the first place, and a beacon of hope for the future. Whatever trials awaited him on the long road to recovery, Jake Thompson was determined to face them head-on, with the same courage and determination that had saved him from the depths of the sea. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital room cast a clinical glow over Jake Thompson as he gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. His physical therapist, Megan, stood beside him, her hands hovering nearby as Jake attempted to take another step with his injured leg. "That's it, Jake. Nice and slow," Megan encouraged, her voice a mix of professional detachment and genuine concern. "Remember to shift your weight gradually." Jake nodded, unable to speak as he concentrated on the monumental task of simply putting one foot in front of the other. The pain in his leg was excruciating, a burning sensation that seemed to intensify with each movement. But he pushed through it, determined to make progress. It had been 6 weeks since the shark attack, and Jake was finally well enough to begin the arduous process of rehabilitation. The surgeries had been successful in saving his leg, but the road to recovery was proving to be even more challenging than he had anticipated. As Jake took another tentative step, his leg buckled beneath him. He let out a frustrated growl as Megan quickly moved to support him, preventing him from falling. "It's okay, Jake, you're doing great," Megan reassured him, helping him back to the parallel bars. "Let's take a break and try again in a few minutes." Jake shook his head, his jaw clenched in determination. "No, I can keep going. I need to keep going." Megan fixed him with a stern look. "Pushing yourself too hard too fast isn't going to speed up your recovery. It might even set you back. Take a breather, Jake." Reluctantly, Jake allowed Megan to help him into a nearby wheelchair. As he sat down, the full weight of his exhaustion hit him. He leaned back, closing his eyes and trying to steady his breathing. "You're making good progress," Megan said, handing him a bottle of water. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but you've come a long way in just a few weeks." Jake took a long drink before responding. "Not far enough," he muttered. "At this rate, I'll be lucky to walk normally again, let alone get back in the water." Megan pulled up a chair and sat across from him, her expression serious. "Jake, I need you to understand something. Your injury was severe. The fact that you're walking at all at this stage is remarkable. You need to be patient with yourself." Jake nodded, but the frustration was evident in his eyes. I know. It's just, being a lifeguard isn't just my job, Megan. It's who I am. And every day I spend in here is another day I'm not out there doing what I'm meant to do." Megan's expression softened. "I understand, Jake, but right now, your job is to heal, to get stronger, and you're doing that job admirably." Before Jake could respond, there was a knock at the door. Sarah, Jake's wife, poked her head in, a tentative smile on her face. "Is it okay if we come in?" she asked. Jake straightened up in his wheelchair, trying to look less exhausted than he felt. "Of course," he said, managing a small smile. Sarah entered, followed by their daughter Emma, and to Jake's surprise, Tim, his fellow lifeguard, and the man who had pulled him from the water after the shark attack. "Uncle Tim!" Emma exclaimed, rushing over to give Jake a careful hug before turning to greet Tim. Tim ruffled Emma's hair affectionately before turning his attention to Jake. The two men regarded each other for a moment, a wealth of unspoken emotions passing between them. "You're looking better, mate," Tim said finally, his voice gruff with emotion. Jake nodded, grateful for his friend's presence. "Thanks to you," he replied. "I never properly thanked you for what you did that day." Tim waved off the gratitude. "You'd have done the same for me. How's the rehab going?" Jake glanced at Megan, who took the cue to give them some privacy. "I'll be back in 15 minutes for your next set," she said, excusing herself from the room. Once Megan had left, Jake let out a long sigh. "It's tough," he admitted. "Tougher than I expected. Some days it feels like I'm never going to get back to where I was." Sarah moved to his side, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "But you're making progress, Jake. We can all see it." Emma, who had been listening intently, piped up. "Daddy, are you going to be able to teach me to surf?" "Soon, you promised, remember." The innocent question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Jake felt a lump forming in his throat as he looked at his daughter's hopeful face. I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "I want to, more than anything, but it might take a while before I'm ready for that." Emma's face fell, and Jake felt a stab of guilt. Tim, sensing the tension, stepped in. "Hey, Emma," he said, crouching down to her level. "How about this? While your dad's getting better, I could start teaching you some of the basics. That way, when he's ready, you'll be able to show him how much you've learned." Emma's eyes lit up at the suggestion. She looked to Jake for approval. "Is that okay, Daddy?" Jake felt a mix of emotions, gratitude towards Tim, sadness at not being able to teach his daughter himself, but ultimately relief that Emma would still get to experience the joy of surfing. "That sounds like a great idea," Jake said, forcing a smile. "Uncle Tim is one of the best surfers I know. You'll be riding waves in no time." As Emma chatted excitedly with Tim about surfing, Sarah leaned in close to Jake. "How are you really doing?" she asked softly. Jake met her gaze, seeing the concern in her eyes. "I'm trying, Sarah. I really am. But some days it feels like I'm drowning all over again." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You're not alone in this, Jake. We're all here for you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." Jake nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. As he looked around the room at his family and friend, he felt a glimmer of hope cutting through the darkness that had been threatening to engulf him. The moment was interrupted by another knock at the door. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered, a tablet in her hands and a serious expression on her face. "Jake," she said, nodding in greeting, "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I have some news about your latest scan results." The atmosphere in the room immediately tensed. Sarah's grip on Jake's hand tightened, and Tim moved closer, a protective presence at his friend's side. "What is it, Doc?" Jake asked, bracing himself for bad news. Elena's expression softened slightly. "It's actually good news, Jake. The latest scans show significant improvement in the muscle and tissue regeneration. If you continue with your current rehabilitation plan, I believe we can start discussing more intensive physical therapy, possibly even some aquatic exercises in the near future." The words aquatic exercises sent a jolt through Jake. The prospect of getting back in the water, even in a controlled environment, was both thrilling and terrifying. "Are you serious?" he asked, hardly daring to believe it. Elena nodded. "It's still a long road ahead, Jake, and I want to be clear, this doesn't mean you'll be back to active duty anytime soon, but it's a positive step in the right direction." Jake felt a surge of emotions, relief, hope, and a renewed determination. He looked at Sarah, seeing his own mix of feelings reflected in her eyes. "Thank you, Elena," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. This means everything." As the news sank in, Jake felt a shift in his perspective. For the first time since the attack, he could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but now he had tangible hope to cling to. Tim clapped him on the shoulder. "See, mate, you'll be back in the water before you know it, and when you are, I'll be right there with you." Emma, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "Does this mean you'll be able to teach me to surf after all, Daddy?" Jake looked at his daughter, her face full of hope and innocence. In that moment, he made a silent vow to himself. He would recover. He would regain his strength, and one day he would stand on a surfboard with Emma, sharing with her the joy and respect for the ocean that had shaped his entire life. "You bet, sweetheart," he said, his voice strong with newfound determination. "Just give me a little more. Time to get stronger, and we'll ride those waves together." As Megan returned to continue the therapy session, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenge ahead was still immense, but now he had a clear goal to work towards. With his family's support and his own indomitable spirit, Jake Thompson was ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead on his journey back to the sea. The early morning sun cast a golden glow across Bondi Beach, the sand still cool and unmarked by footprints. The waves rolled in with a steady rhythm, their gentle roar a familiar and comforting sound to Jake Thompson as he stood at the water's edge. He inhaled deeply, savoring the salty air that had once been as natural to him as breathing. It had been 6 months since the shark attack that had nearly claimed his life and irrevocably altered his future. 6 months of grueling physical therapy, of small victories and crushing setbacks, of learning to live with the constant reminder of that fateful day etched into his scarred flesh. Jake's hand unconsciously moved to his right thigh, fingers tracing the jagged lines that now marked his skin. The scars were still an angry red, a stark contrast to his sun-bronzed skin. He could feel the uneven texture beneath his palm, a roadmap of his struggle and survival. "You ready for this, mate?" Tim's voice broke through Jake's reverie. Jake turned to see his friend and fellow lifeguard approaching, a soft foam surfboard tucked under his arm. Tim's face bore a mix of concern and encouragement, his eyes searching Jake's for any sign of doubt or fear. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jake replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. This was the moment he had been working towards for months. His first time back in the ocean since the attack. Dr. Rodriguez had finally given him clearance for light aquatic activities, and Jake had immediately set his sights on getting back on a board. But now, faced with the reality of the situation, he felt a flutter of anxiety in his chest. Tim must have sensed his unease because he placed a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "We'll take it slow, yeah? No pressure. If at any point you want to call it quits, just say the word." Jake nodded, grateful for his friend's understanding. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling the cool water lapping at his ankles. The sensation sent a shiver up his spine, memories of that terrible day threatening to overwhelm him. "You've got this, Jake," Tim encouraged, "one step at a time." Slowly, methodically, Jake waded deeper into the water. Each step was a battle against both the physical limitations of his healing body and the psychological scars that ran just as deep as the physical ones. By the time the water reached his waist, his heart was pounding and his breath came in short. Sharp gasps. "You okay?" Tim asked, concern evident in his voice. Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He focused on his breathing, using the techniques his therapist had taught him to manage his anxiety. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slowly the panic began to subside. When he finally felt steady enough, Jake turned to Tim. "Let's do this," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. Tim grinned and handed over the soft foam board. "Remember, we're just going to paddle out and sit on the board for a bit. No pressure to catch any waves today." Jake positioned himself. On the board, the familiar motions coming back to him despite the months away from the water. As he began to paddle, he felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The joy of being back in his element warred with the lingering fear of what lurked beneath the surface. They paddled out beyond the break, the exertion causing Jake's muscles to burn in a way that was both painful and oddly satisfying. When they reached a calm spot, Jake sat up on his board, straddling it as he had done countless times before. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They simply sat, bobbing gently with the swells, watching the shoreline grow smaller in the distance. "How are you feeling?" Tim finally asked, breaking the silence. Jake took a moment to consider the question. "Scared," he admitted. "Excited. Grateful. All at once." Tim nodded in understanding. "That's normal, mate. After what you've been through, it'd be weird if you weren't feeling a whole mix of things." Jake's gaze drifted to the horizon, his mind replaying the events of that fateful day. You know, when I was fighting that shark, there was a moment when I thought it was all over, that I'd never see Sarah or Emma again, never feel the sun on my face or the salt spray on my skin. He paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in his throat. And now, being back out here, it's like I'm getting a second chance at life. Tim reached out, gripping Jake's arm firmly. You are, mate, and you've earned it. The way you've fought back, the determination you've shown in your recovery, it's bloody inspiring, Jake. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his chest at his friend's words. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel a sense of pride in how far he'd come. As they sat on their boards, the sun climbing higher in the sky, Jake began to relax. The familiar rhythm of the ocean, the cry of seagulls overhead, the distant shouts of early morning beachgoers, it all combined to create a sense of homecoming. You know, Jake said after a while, I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next. Tim raised an eyebrow. Yeah? What are you thinking? Jake took a deep breath. I know I can't go back to active lifeguard duty, not with my leg the way it is, but I've been talking to the council about taking on a role in water safety education, teaching kids about rip currents, shark awareness, that sort of thing. A slow smile spread across Tim's face. Jake, that's brilliant. You'd be perfect for that. Jake nodded, feeling a spark of excitement at the prospect. It's not the same as being out on patrol, but it's a way to stay connected to the beach, to keep making a difference. Plus, Tim added with a grin, you've got one hell of a story to share now. Nothing drives home the importance of water safety like a real-life shark attack survivor. Jake chuckled, the sound surprising him. It felt good to laugh, to find humor in a situation that had for so long been shrouded in darkness and pain. As they continued to chat, Jake felt the last vestiges of his anxiety melting away. The ocean, which had become a source of fear and trauma, was slowly reclaiming its place as a source of comfort and joy. Suddenly, Tim's expression changed, his eyes widening as he looked past Jake. Mate, he said slowly, don't freak out, but we've got company. Jake felt his heart rate spike as he turned to look in the direction Tim was pointing. About 50 meters away, a dorsal fin cut through the water, moving parallel to their position. For a moment, Jake felt paralyzed, the old fear gripping him like an icy fist. But as he watched the fin's smooth, undulating movement, he realized it wasn't a shark at all. It's a dolphin, he breathed, relief washing over him. As if on cue, the dolphin leapt from the water, its sleek body arcing gracefully before splashing back down. It was soon joined by several others, the pod playing and frolicking in the morning sun. Jake found himself laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to come from his very soul. The sight of these beautiful, intelligent creatures, so at home in the element that had nearly claimed his life, struck him as profoundly poetic. Would you look at that? Tim said, his own voice filled with wonder. Seems like the ocean's welcoming you back, Jake. As they watched the dolphins' joyful display, Jake felt something shift inside him. The ocean, in all its vast and unpredictable nature, was not his enemy. It was a force to be respected, certainly, but also one that held immense beauty and life, I think, Jake said slowly. I'm ready to catch a wave. Tim looked at him in surprise. You sure about that? No need to push yourself. Jake nodded, feeling more certain than he had in months. I'm sure, nothing big, mind you, just a small one to start. But I need to do this. For myself. Tim studied him for a moment before breaking into a wide grin. All right then, let's do it. I've got your back, mate. As they paddled back towards the break, Jake felt a sense of peace settling over him. The road to recovery was far from over, but this moment, here in the water, surrounded by the beauty and power of the ocean, felt like a significant milestone. When a suitable wave approached, Jake positioned himself, muscle memory taking over despite the months away. As he felt the swell lift his board, he pushed himself up, his injured leg protesting but holding firm. For a brief, glorious moment, Jake Thompson was riding a wave again. The rush of adrenaline, the spray of salt water on his face, the pure exhilaration of being one with the ocean, it all came flooding back. As he rode the wave towards the shore, Jake felt tears mixing with the salt water on his cheeks. They were tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude for this second chance at life. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, days when the pain and the memories would threaten to overwhelm him. But in this moment, gliding across the face of a wave with the morning sun warming his back, Jake Thompson was exactly where he needed to be. He was home. The rhythmic beeping of the heart rate monitor filled the quiet hospital room as Jake Thompson sat on the edge of his bed, his scarred right leg dangling just above the cold linoleum floor. His physical therapist, Megan, stood nearby, her clipboard tucked under her arm as she watched Jake with a mix of professional assessment and genuine concern. "All right, Jake," Megan said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's try standing again. Remember, use the parallel bars for support if you need to." Jake nodded, his jaw set with determination. He placed his hands on either side of him, gripping the edge of the bed tightly. With a deep breath, he pushed himself up, his good leg taking most of the weight as he slowly transferred some of it to his injured one. A sharp pain shot through his thigh, causing Jake to wince. But he didn't sit back, down. Instead, he stood there, swaying slightly, his breaths coming in short, controlled gasps. "That's it," Megan encouraged. "How does it feel?" Jake took a moment before responding, focusing on the sensations in his leg. "It hurts," he admitted, "but it's holding." Megan nodded, making a note on her clipboard. "Good. Now, let's try a few steps. Remember, slow and steady." Jake moved his hands to the parallel bars on either side of him. He took a tentative step forward with his good leg, then slowly brought his injured leg up to meet it. The movement sent another jolt of pain through his thigh, but Jake gritted his teeth and pushed through it. "Excellent," Megan said. "Now another. Step." By agonizing step, Jake made his way down the length of the parallel bars. By the time he reached the end, sweat was beading on his forehead, and his injured leg was trembling with exertion. "All right, that's enough for now," Megan said, helping Jake into a nearby wheelchair. "You're making progress, Jake. It might not feel like it, but you are." Jake nodded, too out of breath to respond. As his breathing slowly returned to normal, he looked up at Megan. "When do you think I'll be ready to try without the bars?" Megan's expression turned serious. "Jake, I know you're eager to get back on your feet, but we need to take this one step at a time. Your injury was severe. It's going to take time and patience to regain your full mobility." Jake felt a familiar frustration welling up inside him. "Time and patience," he repeated, his voice tinged with bitterness. "That's all anyone ever says to me these days." Megan crouched down, meeting Jake's eyes. "I know it's frustrating, but pushing yourself too hard too fast could set back your recovery. We need to do this right." Before Jake could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Sarah, Jake's wife, poked her head in, a tentative smile on her face. "Is it okay if we come in?" she asked. Jake straightened up in his wheelchair, trying to look less exhausted than he felt. "Of course," he said, managing a small smile. Sarah entered, followed by their daughter Emma, and to Jake's surprise, his old friend and fellow lifeguard, Tim. "Uncle Tim," Emma exclaimed, rushing over to give Jake a careful hug before turning to greet Tim. Tim ruffled Emma's hair affectionately before turning his attention to Jake. The two men regarded each other for a moment, a wealth of unspoken emotions passing between them. "You're looking better, mate," Tim said finally, his voice gruff with emotion. Jake nodded, grateful for his friend's presence. "Thanks to you," he replied. "I never properly thanked you for what you did that day." Tim waved off the gratitude. "You'd have done the same for me. How's the rehab going?" Jake glanced at Megan, who took the cue to give them some privacy. "I'll be back in a bit to discuss your home exercises," she said, excusing herself from the room. Once Megan had left, Jake let out a long sigh. "It's tough," he admitted. "Tougher than I expected. Some days it feels like I'm never going to get back to where I was." Sarah moved to his side, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "But you're making progress, Jake. We can all see it." Emma, who had been listening intently, piped up. "Daddy, when you get better, can we go to the beach again? You promised to teach me how to surf, remember?" The innocent question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Jake felt a lump forming in his throat as he looked at his daughter's hopeful face. I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "I want to more than anything, but it might take a while before I'm ready for that." Emma's face fell and Jake felt a stab of guilt. Tim, sensing the tension, stepped in. "Hey, Emma," he said, crouching down to her level. How about this? While your dad's getting better, I could start teaching you some of the basics on land. That way, when he's ready, you'll be able to show him how much you've learned. Emma's eyes lit up at the suggestion. She looked to Jake for approval. Is that okay, Daddy? Jake felt a mix of emotions, gratitude towards Tim, sadness at not being able to teach his daughter himself, but ultimately relief that Emma would still get to experience the joy of surfing. That sounds like a great idea, Jake said, forcing a smile. Uncle Tim is one of the best surfers I know. You'll be riding waves in no time. As Emma chatted excitedly with Tim about surfing, Sarah leaned in close to Jake. How are you really doing? She asked softly. Jake met her gaze, seeing the concern in her eyes. I'm trying, Sarah. I really am. But some days it feels like I'm drowning all over again. Sarah squeezed his hand. You're not alone in this, Jake. We're all here for you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. Jake nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. As he looked around the room at his family and friend, he felt a glimmer of hope cutting through the darkness that had been threatening to engulf him. I've been thinking, Jake said, his voice low, about the future, about what comes next. Sarah raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to continue. I know I can't go back to active lifeguard duty, Jake continued. Not with my leg the way it is, but I've been talking to the council about taking on a role in water safety education, teaching kids about rip currents, shark awareness, that sort of thing. Sarah's face lit up. Jake, that's wonderful. You'd be perfect for that. Tim, who had overheard, chimed in. She's right, mate. You've got the experience, and now, well, you've got one hell of a story to share. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his chest at their encouragement. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel a sense of purpose, of hope for the future. It's not the same as being out on patrol, Jake admitted, but it's a way to stay connected to the beach, to keep making a difference. As they continued to talk, Jake felt some of the weight he'd been carrying start to lift. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but he wasn't walking it alone. Later that evening, after Sarah had taken Emma home and Tim had left with promises to visit again soon, Jake sat by the window of his hospital room. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the city skyline. He thought about the ocean, about the life he'd lived, and the one that stretched out before him now. It would be different, certainly. Challenging in ways he was only beginning to understand. But as he watched the sky turn from gold to deep purple, Jake Thompson made a silent vow to himself. He would heal. He would adapt. And somehow, someway, he would find his way back to the water that had shaped his entire life. Not as the man he was before, but as someone new, someone stronger, someone who had stared death in the face and lived to tell the yay. Tale? As night fell over the city, Jake closed his eyes and listened. And there, beneath the hum of hospital machinery and distant traffic, he could almost hear it. The steady, eternal rhythm of the waves, calling him home.